Before the Napoleonic Wars, the future John VI was regent of Portugal. Because his mother Maria I suffered from mental illness, he was one of the last absolute monarchs in Europe, so joined in the war against the French revolutionaries. Although Spain was soon defeated, John chose to remain close to Britain, and didn't agree to become part of Napoleon's continental system. This, however, split his court, and even his wife sought to depose him, and align with the French and their new Spanish puppet. Then in 1807 the French prepared to invade, so a British squadron offered John and his court safe passage to Brazil, or if he refused, they would capture Lisbon. So John agreed to set sail to Brazil, and set up court in Rio, greatly transforming the city, while the British fought off French invasions of Portugal. But this British help came at a price, because Brazil could now freely trade with Britain, and British goods began flooding into Portugal, weakening the local industries. Plus the Portuguese army was left under the control of British General William Carter Beresford. So when Napoleon was defeated, Portugal had been reduced to a sort of colony of Brazil, and Britain exerted a great deal of influence there. But John VI did not return to Portugal. After the wars, he enjoyed more freedoms in Brazil, and because many Spanish colonies were in open rebellion, so he hoped he could prevent the same thing from happening in Brazil. So he elevated Brazil to the status of a kingdom, and created the United Kingdom of Portugal. Brazil and the Algarves in Portugal, however, he granted more powers to William Carter Beresford, essentially giving him command of the country, angering the liberals there. And Beresford discovered a plot against him in 1817, led by a Grand Master of a Masonic lodge, Gomes Freire de Andrade, and his co-conspirators were all largely Freemasons, and were subsequently executed. But this just helped fuel anti-British sentiment in Portugal. Sensing this, Beresford traveled to Brazil to request further powers from John VI in 1820, however. This came at a very bad time, because over in Spain, soldiers who were on their way to crush the independence movements in the Americas mutinied. King Ferdinand VII of Spain responded by reinstating the liberal constitution of 1812 and granting more powers to liberal ministers. Inspired by this, regiments in the Portuguese army rose up in Porto in August, and the revolution spread across the country. The liberal rebels faced very little opposition, as Barrisons were still in Brazil, and after Lisbon was under their control, they called for a cortes, an assembly of the nobility, bourgeois and the likes. This was the first since the Portuguese kings became absolute monarchs in the late 17th century, and in it, they drafted a new constitution and set a list of demands. These included John returning to Portugal as a constitutional monarch, and reducing the status of Brazil to a colony once again. John obliged and returned to Portugal in 1821, leaving his son Pedro in control of Brazil. And in 1822, he swore to uphold the new constitution. However, the new turmoil in Brazil led to Pedro declaring independence from Portugal, and ultimately, this led to the Brazilian Independence War. And in Portugal, the country was split between the liberal constitutionalists and the conservative absolutists. For instance, John's wife wanted to restore the role's old powers, and formed an alliance with their youngest son Miguel. Then in 1823, the same year, the liberal constitution was revoked in Spain. Miguel, as head of the army, rose up in Lisbon in support of absolutism. John, fearing being deposed, agreed to back his son and renounced the constitution. However, Miguel ultimately wanted control of Portugal, so in 1824 he rose up again. Under the guise of crushing the Freemasons, he used some regiments to round up political opponents and besieged John within his palace. John was able to flee and board a British ship, and there he arranged a meeting with Miguel. There, however, Miguel was removed from his post and exiled, and John was able to continue to rule as a moderate, absolute monarch until his death in 1826. But Brazil were able to secure their independence, and his death caused a succession crisis between his sons Pedro, the constitutionalist emperor of Brazil, and Miguel, the exiled absolutist, fought one another during the liberal wars.